One of my friends who is very honest, an architect in Massachusetts, has occasionally requested that I make talk videos. He feels that some people find it more comfortable when hearing unusual matters to be able to judge the person who's communicating on the human level of hearing their voice, trying to assess the conversational elements, what really could have happened. And they find it easier to understand this way than they do from reading. I've thought about sitting down with some of my harder worked essays and just reading them out loud, but I've never gotten around to doing that. It's very time consuming to write these testimonial reports. The compound issue of battery doesn't seem to me that it could be lost on everybody who I have had contact with. They surely have heard things. They surely have covered up for what happened themselves. So it's a peculiar situation in that way. And of course, there is a caveat emptor when it comes to my vocalizings. I have a neurological injury in my head, and I have 98% deafness. It does me no special good to speak of these matters because I can't hear on the playback what I sound like. But for John, my friend in Massachusetts, at his suggestion, I've gone about recording some videos that I've put into YouTube, some of which have gotten 100 viewers, which impresses me that maybe it's worthwhile. Many people think that because of the important issues that I raise, that somehow I'm grandstanding. It's true that I speak for myself and as a victim, but one of my goals is protection of the community, advice to my neighbors. I want them to think about what is going on around us, and if they're participating, second guess their participation with the thought that it's not ennobling. Everybody should rise in the attempt to be a better human being. Without role models, people languish. Our society crystallizes around leadership in many important cases. And I want to talk about one of the issues that's off the radar. It doesn't come up in the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the Seattle Times, the Chicago Tribune. They don't discuss, because of fear and because of inordinate desperation to please a constituency, they don't discuss the very sad fact that it has been proven that Carnegie Mellon and the city of Seattle queer lobby under Donald Trump, Texas Queer Magazine, have worked extremely hard to cover up and justify the AIDS attack. People think that's an extraordinarily strange and elliptical sentiment for such people. After all, don't they carry the inordinate burden of caring for the community that's affected? Why would they justify? My goal in this discussion isn't so much to explain why they do it, I suppose, because I don't think there's any way anybody can. You know, it's an ecological thing of some sort for them. But to show that they did, I mean, it's important. It's the most important thing. Maybe even to show how they did. You know, to show the dimension, sadism that they were driven to from leadership from the Warhol Foundation and the manipulation of fashion politics and the rewards of being recognized and accepted by people like Donald Trump, who was a friend of Andy Warhol. And I'm out here in Klondike country. It's important to remember that Seattle belonged to the Trumps long before anybody knew who they were, because of the Klondike gold rush. And in referring you to the importance of this issue, I think many people have gotten accustomed to the AIDS attack. They've forgotten it the way that SARS has been forgotten, until the recent wake-up call from Wuhan, which was put upon China on December 7th, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, was when the Wuhan flu was released into their world, sadly enough. And my heart goes out to the people of Wuhan, just as my heart went out to the people afflicted by the AIDS virus when I was a medical library clerk in 1984. Now, of course, the people I'm talking about want to cover that up. They don't like it to be said that I was grieving as a medical library clerk, that I was indignant, that I was outraged. They make up all kinds of other stories about what happened with me. I had been tortured as a child. They don't want anybody to admit that. It was horrible. But they want to make money from the records of it, and by denying it. And it's typical deceit by people who are, you know, pedophiles, like Peter Gabriel, advocating for pedophiles, like Paul McCartney. And they use John Lennon's association with Jimmy Savilas and, you know, people like Epstein, and to say that this was normal, you know, to kidnap and brutally torture a child, for him to disappear from school after biting his fingernails bloody, being sent to the office for crying, pleading for his life, disappearing for a month and nobody looking for him. And then the people who did it turn up, they have names like Pittman, which is all indexed into things like the Quarrymen, which is all worshipped by people who are archivists of the assholes in the so-called Beatles. And so, why did this happen, and how did it happen? You know, one of the reasons it happened is because of the Fight Club dating game ethic that is considered to be routine sports in not just the gay community, but in the hub of University of Washington and places like Carnegie Mellon. There's certain rules of etiquette that make person either the apple of the eye of the dandified, or they're considered a reject, somebody who doesn't belong, who should be ostracized. And this code of conduct was violated a little bit by me because I was in a state of crying shame. I had a neurological injury, and the people who did it to me knew that. They knew I didn't really understand what had happened, and the university system was covering it up. The medical community was covering it up. They were in on, this operation to change things they felt for the worse. For the better, by the thinning of the tribe. Now, it is for the worse that we've become so hardened that a mass murder genocide can be committed by us or in our name. And instead of caring for the victims, they say, well, he was a crybaby. It's an adult education problem. The lack of sympathy or remorse for what was done to me. It supposedly is a sacred shield of the character that is expected of the victims, and if anybody's going to be given reasons to be a crybaby, it's somebody like me, and so on. It's Nazi German mentality, and it's coming from the people who at first seemed to be very caring for one another. You wonder why we didn't go after it the way that Wuhan was expected to go after the Wuhan flu. And one of the reasons was because of the egotistical politics of the time. Reagan was blaming the gay community's attitude, and so they went into a siege mentality against common quarantine tactics in an attempt to protect them. And it seemed right, the reactionary attitude, because of how horrific the idea that they were to blame for something that was being done to them would be. Cleverly, Reagan and his minions worked the angle that, for some peculiar reason, this golem of concern should die by AIDS to show his compassion. And he had a gang that proves that the Black Panther Party in Seattle and Donald Trump are the same gang. They have absolutely the exact same politics. They're working together. When I was a child, a man named Donald Finnegan, this was before I was taken hostage by Donald Oster. Donald Finnegan, he was a tall, looming young man, would come up to me and he would go like this at me, point at me, and go like this. And I was really very scared of him. And of course, as soon as the teacher looked, he would look away and say, no, I didn't do anything. And Donald Finnegan and the Black Panther Party, they're always doing this. Oh, I didn't do anything. And they expect you not to say anything about them. They, warlords of media who support them and support the blackout, like to dangle the bait that the winner will have money, millions of dollars. And of course they have tons of money. They can just pass it back and forth to each other and get this perception going. And it's a Fight Club dating game that they created to ransom the icon of a historic victim by doing this threat stuff. And then I'm not doing anything. And they've done terrible things to me. They deafened me. They gave me a sarin-like nerve agent. They poisoned me in the mouth recently, within the last few years. I'm still battling to keep my teeth. And subjected me to diabetes, humiliating things like erectile dysfunction. Nobody wants to hear this, I'm sure, but it's the truth. It's systematic degradation is something they're calling a liberal. Now, they inducted me into a life or death matter in the AIDS attack. It was a Fight Club hazing operation, they claimed, but it was obviously a premeditated AIDS testing operation. They had been talking about it before there was AIDS. The leaders who emerged, one of them is photographed standing with a stiletto outside the World Trade Center, had namesakes who called me on the phone back in the 1980 when Lenin staged his disappearing act with the help of Cliff Robertson, who starred in the pioneer episode of The Outer Limits, which was postponed for Kennedy's state funeral. He was also Kennedy in PT-109, and he was above the World Trade Centers when the planes hit. He went there in a private plane to watch. You may remember Outer Limits was about control of the television set. The people who control your television set operate from media in Hollywood. They've used a similar name to me, Jim Carrey, in something called The Truman Show. They chose Truman because Harry Truman disliked intrusions into the private life of people, and this was all about putting someone on 24-hour super real drama television without their knowledge or consent. And of course Truman was behind the atom bomb, which saved my father's life. So, like the name of the atom bomb, I was attacked as a little boy. And this was greatly to the delight of the cackling pervert Yoko Ono, who controls the money and the purse strings for New York's and Seattle's queer lobby. So it was all set up to do this to me and justify my dignities and rights as a human being. Now, to understand the history of some of this, you need to go back and take a look at how could they create so brazenly a pornographic pyre around the AIDS attack, and how could they have elicited the help of people in defending, I mean, the very man who triggered the refusal to take proper precautions, Ronald Reagan, was later extolled by Ringo Starr and Donald Trump and the war halls as the hero of the case. Ronald Reagan, how is that possible? How is it possible that people could be driven to their deaths like horses running to a burning barn, and even the idea of it scripted in the Texas school book that we found? How is it possible that such a person could then be called a hero, representing John Lennon, when he put a wreath at the Bitburg-Belsen Gestapo cemetery in formerly Nazi Germany, is calling them victims too, and demanding that the headhunters who brutally torture me be forgiven in return for my life, which is what the queer lobby is doing. It goes back, to the Kennedy assassination, and the symbolism, of course, the bayonet up the girdle of Jackie Kennedy symbolizes abortion. Henry Wade, who framed Oswald, who was a namesake of Oswald Mosley, using that nom de guerre, who was the leader of the British Union of Fascists, said to a moral certainty. He liked moral certainties. He was the man who led the abortion campaign, Roe versus Wade, Henry Wade. Framed Oswald, but you see the image that's similar to Edgar Allan Poe on the cover, and this montage that has the style of Sgt. Pepper's. I want to get back to that because it's not an accident, but I want to show you a photograph with the death cab for that cutie Oswald. This is out, it's coming out of the Dallas police station. Notice the nuclear bunker sign. There was a Japanese diplomat, you can see him in films, following Jack Ruby around in the Dallas Police Department, who was obviously party to all of this. And Jack Ruby was a pornographer. He ran the Carousel Club. And one of the things that we found in the script is mention of the Neva Corporation. It was in a Holocaust survivor community, referring to me as C, and they have a C in a Star of David as their symbol. That's the symbol of the Neva Corporation. And Neva is mentioned in the script. And the C means, you know, if you try to, the Black Panther Trump situation in Seattle found a woman, me expelled from the community college in Seattle and then subject to arrest for protesting the Ripper murder of Shannon Harps over a penny. And that's what that C symbolizes. It's the CIA concept that if you try to have human rights in America, civil rights in America, you're dead. And they raised me under a picture of Hitler nuns, as you can see. There were 3 of them. There's more clear pictures. Nobody can dispute it. So, the Carousel Club was part of this new order that has a fight club ethic around virginity. They called it, two virgins pussy ball. This is the girl who was murdered. So you have to understand this. None of them ever cared about the snow falling in Cedars element of what King Crimson had done to me to make me a pariah among my own peers. I had an impacted neuroplastic head trauma from brutal torture as a child. And it was buried and I didn't know it was there and they did. Okay, so this is their ethical standard of fair play. To use neurohypnosis on it, to interrogate it, with the false accusation that they admit, apparently they even knew was a false accusation of date rape. But Penis Gabriel said, why would Crary be afraid if he wasn't hiding something? Why would somebody who was tortured, threatened with prison for a false armed robbery arrest, whose best friend was attacked and raped, to punish her for teaching him sign language, be afraid when the same people started making terribly cruel, libelous accusations on international media? That's supposed to make sense. It makes some kind of weird sense to Penis Gabriel's sick mind. And it was all found out to have been neurohypnosis of a trauma that they had impacted of a neurological nature. That's a snow falling in Cedars issue. And they never stopped. They continued to lie. They continued to poison. What gives? I'll explain what gives. In 1923, the guru and godfather of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, from the House of Windsor. He was King Edward, the 8th or something. Stepped forward and said to people like Cecil B. DeMille in Wall Street, and it was reported by Edward G. somebody in the New York Magazine or something, that Hollywood should be under the firm control of the Church of England. So, what gives is that if you look at the play action, you can get married in a church and lead respectable conforming lives to the power structure of the Church of England, or you can be controlled by the pornography institution, and if you are fortunate enough to have money or do lip service to their icons, you might still have some element of privacy, but you will always be on the margins of legal power. And the more likely outcome is that you will be harassed and used for a whore, and you won't be able to find or secure a family. Your best efforts, if they're recognized for some sort of talent, will be rewarded with contract call girls masquerading, or men masquerading as though they are loyal, in dramatized in the film Rollerball, where the wife was, the man was dearly beloved to him, and she became the blackmail wedge whereby the corporation tried to control him. This sort of thing is very real. And the Japanese pornography institution processes their money in London, England. It's an alliance between Hollywood and the Church of England. In other words, it was clearly holy war. The church illness, AIDS, was all planned in advance by the regal monster King Edward and his minions in the Beatles, who put the symbol of JFK's murder, the bloody racing glove. As you could see, there was a girl dressed in a Shinto shrine outfit, watching Kennedy have his head blown off. A little girl. The whole operation was called Operation Little Girl. At the end of Superfly, there's a injection needle-like skyscraper. It says Ron Priest. So, you know, the idea of Hollywood being part of the Holy War is clearly very carefully written into the script of this totalitarian fight club, partially conceived as Dulles by Alan Dulles as a duel when they took Kennedy to Dallas. Dulles in Dallas was the will of the Fuhrer, who was safe in Argentina, and Donald Trump is his new altar boy.